authorized code. Well then, let's try again. That didn't work.
There's a protocol here saying webinar is now streaming.
Well, let's go see if it is streaming because it is not showing up for me. So I'm going to go to my channel and make sure that we are streaming. And I'm sure that if we are streaming, we'll find out very soon. Someone will text me saying you are streaming, and no one has yet. Videos. If we are live on YouTube, please be patient with us. No, we are not live on YouTube. It's saying that we are, and we aren't. So live. Now we might be streaming. YouTube, please bear with us if you can see us. We're just taking a moment to pull up the control panel. There you go. All right, we're live today with the legendary author, Stewart Pearce. He just really went live with a powerful book, Diana, the Voice of Change. And I'm so excited to talk about it with you today. Thank you for joining us, Stewart Pearce.
It's a thrill. It's a thrill. I'm so excited about the emission of this book because it's taken over 3 years to bring it all together. And now it's here and it's having a wonderful radiation into the world, wonderful impact already. Wonderful people buying it and appraising it and saying how super it is. And, you know, it's only live through amazon.co.uk at the moment. The Kindle version is international. And later I'll give you the very abbreviated web link that takes one straight to the page. But it won't be live on amazon.com and therefore available fully in the United States until October. This is apparently how it works. I'm learning because this is the first time I self-published. And so that means that, of course, it can gather energy here, these rich principles that come through the book and the wonder of the beauty of igniting radiance with Diana, how she ignited radiance for herself. And I think I may have helped a little bit through the last 2 years of her life. So it'll have, a gathering of the wave of energy so that I know how she was adored in the United States of America and how there are thousands and thousands of people, because I've been talking about it in the States for the last 3 years, waiting for the book to come out. So it's going to be so exciting. So thank you for inviting me along today.
Thank you. Wonderful. And so you mentored Diana personally from 1995 to 1997. Is that correct?
Finished, of course, by the horror of her death.
Wow. That must have been such a tremendously powerful experience to be there in those most transformative periods of her life. And she was finding her voice and becoming that voice of change. And she found you right at that time, right when we were going through so many powerful things. What was that like to be there with her during that time to mentor Princess Diana?
Well, to be honest, the idea was put to me 6 months prior to my acceptance. And I was, of course, immensely touched and honored to be asked. But I said no. And the reason why I said no was not because of Diana, but it was because of what she was surrounded by at that time, which was a circus of activity, of repudiation and rebuke of such dimension that she was still very, very hurt and going through the process of, as it were, announcing the annulment of her marriage. This didn't really happen until the Martin Bashir interview, the famous Panorama interview, which took place in the summer of '95. So I'd been asked, but I saw the circus and really didn't want to be involved because so many of our brethren, our kindred spirits, so many healers, therapists, or indeed consultants of some description, had worked with Diana And then when she had completed her assignment with them, they'd gone to the daily tabloids and sold their story for thousands and thousands of pounds. And it had created this network of psychic wounds within her that, of course, had fed what we saw would become a revelation of divine proportion. But at the time that I'm speaking of, she was deeply hurt. And so 6 months later, when I was asked, I was slightly duped, actually. It was great fun. It wasn't vicious at all. But the person who introduced me was a great friend of Diana's, but she was also a very famous restaurant owner, a restaurateur here. And there's stories about Mara. She had an Italian restaurant. The stories were that the Rolling Stones would call Mara at 3 o'clock in the morning post-concert. So the restaurant had been alive for some time, since the 60s, in a very beautiful area of London. And she would immediately make pasta for them and feed them at 3 o'clock in the morning. So this was how Mara was, which she was immensely open to the world of spirit and had a very keen intuition, and therefore introduced me to a lot of extraordinary people who became my clients. So she called me one day and said, I have somebody that I want you to meet. And I said, oh, wonderful, thank you. How amazing. Who is it? You'll know when you come. Just come. And I said, no, no, who is it? She said, you will find out when you arrive. And she was a mother figure. So, of course, one says, of course, I'll arrive. So I arrived at the restaurant to have lunch with her and the mystery individual. And I spoke to the head waiter, who I knew quite well, and said, who is Madame with? You'll see when you get there, which, in a private room down in the basement of the restaurant. So I skimmied down the stairs, knowing my way very well, and went into the room. And of course, there was Mara and the beautiful Diana, Mara, Diana, and a chair for me. And I was very decorous and did what I've been trained to do with a royal personality, because there's a certain protocol that one goes through, and then sat down. And she grabbed hold of my right arm and leaned into me and said, you will work with me, won't you? And in that moment, I fell in love. I fell in love with the beauty of this extraordinary human being, these amazing eyes that just radiated love. And of course, the story was that she had created this video for the BBC where she'd announced there are 3 people in this marriage. So many Diana lovers will remember that interview. And what she saw was a victim that she no longer wanted to represent in the world. She no longer wanted to present in the world. And so she was looking for someone who was a presence coach that could take her through a makeover period. And the reason why Mara thought I would be useful is that it wouldn't just be a superficial external arrangement of body language and so forth. It would actually answer the deep, deep, deep core of what Diana was all about, because Mara had the hunch, the intuition, that what was happening for Diana was that her soul was radiating to such a degree that her field was beginning to expand with this immense light, and that as soon as she had moved through this thing called divorce, she would radiate even greater light. And so that was my brief.
Right.
The understanding was that our relationship was to be completely confidential. So nobody knew except Mara. And Diana, unlike the impetuosity of Diana, was stumm. So whenever we met, she came to me. I never went to Kensington Palace. And the distinct brief was, any fees need to be paid in cash. I'm not invoicing. And whenever you need a session, you call me on cell and we'll organize it. And she would come sometimes once or twice a week. Mm. So I got to know her very, very well. And words defy. She was one of the most exquisite, one of the most beautiful beings that I've ever spent time with, because of this immense love and the beautiful ordinariness of her, the playfulness, the fun. We would sometimes laugh almost to the point of wetting ourselves, just for the fun of laughing. It was an amazing time of release, but at the same time, it was a period of immense sanctity, because I was actually able to share with her much of what my own teaching had been through the ancient mystery schools, and how we needed to recognize that she was an anointed one, but would not be sitting in the official chair through the consecration of coronation, that hers was to be a symbolic, metaphoric journey, being the queen of everybody's hearts. But what we did was to acknowledge you are an anointed one. And so what we need to do is to find a way of ritualizing what this means, so that the degrees of the anointing, because there's this very magical ceremony at the very heart of coronation for any of the monarchs, where they are touched with oil, this sacred oil, the origin of which is non-specified, but goes all the way back to the kings and queens of the past, and particularly into ancient Jewishness, into ancient Kabbalah. So the oil is placed on the hands, on the breast, and on the brow. And in that moment, it is believed that a magical force comes into the individual where they become a high priest or a high priestess. This is why, for example, Elizabeth II would never abdicate, because she believes that she is anointed and therefore needs to carry the duty of the monarch all the way through to her last breath. Mm-hmm. So I've extrapolated somewhat, but that's how we met.
Mm-hmm. Wow. So let's talk about you and what unfolded within you, during this writing of this book. I know that as authors and writers and musicians and channels alike all around the world, when you're creating something, what were you creating within yourself? What was this experience of writing like?
Well, it's interesting because it must be 4 years ago when my agent, my literary agent, said, the publishers no longer want any of your angel books. They've said that they're no longer interested. There are too many angel books, whereas 30 years ago, everybody wanted angel books. Now there are so many. So we need to think about something else. And I said, well, what do you feel I should write about? And she said immediately, well, you worked with Diana. Why don't you write a book about Diana? I said immediately, I will never write a book about Diana, because our relationship is completely confidential. And too many books have been written, and none of them, I believe, illustrate who this extraordinary human being was. No, not one of them. They chronicleize or diarize her life, but they don't talk about who in essence, who in soul was this girl called Diana Spencer. Mm-hmm. And of course, my darling agent said, there's your book. This is why I asked you. There is no way you would ever write a kiss and tell. You're not a tabloid writer, Stewart. You write about people's souls. And in that moment, I felt Diana. I was so excited by the idea, but still tremulous, because it was like, what am I going to write? And as I left the meeting and came back to this apartment in London, I felt that she was next to me, and I immediately sat down here and started to web out the book. And she talked to me. And so I decided I would take a period of 3 months sabbatical. And all I did, I became an ascetic. I became a monk. I meditated every morning on the substance of the book. I meditated on Diana. I meditated on what quality of conversation do you wish to enlist or elicit. And then she would come through and I would write. Wonderful. So how did it change me? It brought me to a much deeper place, a deep place within my soul of extraordinary stillness and immense beauty and grace, where I felt illuminated by an energy of the noble, the magnanimous mind that always, always is providing the benefaction of love to the people around them. And so I feel that I was given a unique gift. I was given the heavenly gift of grace. And indeed, that was one of the key principles that we defined. What does grace mean? Is it just a physical attribute? Because we talk about people being gracious, they are grace-filled. Or is it actually an outer manifestation from an inner reality? And this is what we conjured between the two of us, because she was very gracious. So what did this mean? And so we brought about the key principles of gentleness, gratitude, and generosity, that they were the three key principles of grace. And of course, there are many ways of defining grace, but this is what we worked on. So in other words, bearing in mind that we human beings tend to be easily quixotic, easily changeable, and that we lose sustainability, that what we needed to do was to look for opportunities in life, in the pulsation of each moment, in the pulsation of each holy instant, where we could express being gentle, where we could give thanks, and where we could be generous to others.
And where we can connect.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, we don't know that she spent, when she wasn't engaged with royal duties, she spent at least 2 or 3 evenings a week in hospitals anonymously. She would just arrive, nobody knew. And she would go in and say, is there anybody in this hospital whose bed I need to sit at? And she would go, can you imagine that there you are lying in hospital, immensely infirm, and who walks in but Diana? Now, I'd written journals during our time together, and I'd forgotten. So I went back to those journals and found some of the people that she touched and interviewed them. And they all said, when she touched me, a force of extraordinary electricity moved through me. And I felt that I was in the presence of the angels. I will never forget that.
Yes, and I feel and observe about Diana this palpable grace. And she gave us all permission to connect to each other via a very vulnerable connection. And, you know, did you find that she was just as vulnerable and authentic in these private times?
Oh gosh, absolutely.
Behind the
I mean,
scenes.
the first thing she would do when she arrived would say something like, do you have any washing up I can do? Can I iron your shirts? She just wanted to get grounded and ordinary. And of course I would say, look, the shirts, forget. I'm not having you iron my shirts. But look, if you go, let's go into the kitchen and make tea. There's some crockery for you to wash up. And so he would stand and spend half of the session in the kitchen talking. And of course, we know that's the hearth or the heart of the home. And so we were talking, I mean, she was extraordinarily ordinary in that sense. She was so human and delicate and decorous, and of course, deeply pained. And so we would move into what was paining her. The thousand natural shocks that flesh is heir to, or the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune that Shakespeare writes about. There were so many because, after all, the patriarchy were in deep repudiation of her and were rebuking her. So we needed to talk about that. Loved by the people and loathed by the establishment. So we needed to find some way of balancing that.
Mm-hmm.
And once we'd identified what it was that she was evoking within the patriarchy, so that she fully understood, we had a way of being able to then transmute the negative into positive, and therefore use the conduit of the repudiation as a way of emitting even more grace.
What I've observed from your book is that you helped her in those instances to find her freedom. And can you tell us a little bit more about that? How can this book help us to find our own freedom?
Well, you see, I feel that we're so preoccupied with doing, that sometimes we get in the way of ourselves. And because we spend so much time doing, we spend so much time in the head, trying to achieve another possibility within the head, and we miss out what's going on within our bodies, and we miss out that feeling is the language of the soul. You know? And so because she was so physiologically primed, in other words, because she loved her body, although she had desecrated it through bulimia and through other activities, which she was completely commensurate with. You know, she'd already found a way of being able to understand what the friend called bulimia had given her. But she was through this. And so, of course, as with anything that has been with us for many years, she still had the psychic scarring, which we were healing. But one of the ways that I suggested would be really important was to up her physical regime. She loved to swim, and so automatically swimming brought her into flow rather than going back into the stagnation that she felt from an emotional point of view in much of the quixotic dynamics that she'd experienced in the royal household. At the same time, by engaging with the breath when she was working out, she had her own specific regime. So it wasn't the enforced regimes that we see some people accessing when they go to the gym, which is heavily weight laden, by lifting the weights. She would actually find the activities that stimulated her endorphins. And so she became more and more aware of the leanness of her body, of the musculature of her body as a form, as an architecture that she could use to then start working on the inside.
And you mentioned
What
breath in that, which is incredible. As a vocal alchemist, you spent so much of your time, leading the world and helping people find that breath, which is the key to finding your own, as you call it, signature note.
yeah.
And finding that voice of change within yourself. And you mentioned in the book that this voice of change finds all of its breath ways to help us express our personal sovereignty. What are breath ways, and how does that help us?
Well, it's principally flow.
Mm-hmm.
That most of the time we're holding ourselves in compounds of tension where the energy is resisting rather than flowing.
Mm-hmm.
And as soon as we start to breathe, we automatically feel relaxed. But most importantly, we feel ourselves back into flow. And I feel that our breath flow is actually a resonance that is a mirroring of the universal flow, which is why all our ancient peoples referred to breath as being the anima mundi, or the chi of life. It says in the beginning of Genesis that God breathed on the surface of the waters and brought forth life. And God breathed into the nostrils of man, and man became a living soul. So evidently the rhythm of breath, the expansion of breath, the extent of breath, when it's managed well, is absolutely crucial. Where it fits into our voices is that we can't make sound without breath. But what's interesting also is that our breath is our soul. It's the very vital essence of who we are. So we found ways of being able to muscularly opening that, because after all, she was immensely sensitive and empathic and had been repudiated and rebuked by the external world in the form of the authoritative measures of the world, not the people of the world necessarily, but the establishment. And so she was restricting her body intention all over the body, all over her body. Through contraction, she was able to create a prison for herself rather than opening up to the wonderment of the playfulness and the seeming abandonment of all of her creativity. As soon as we accessed the breath, she could feel this extraordinary sense of flow that then enabled her to find a much more open voice, a fuller position for her voice, rather than being here and being very light and not actually being in the breath, but above the breath. What enabled her to do was to begin to communicate the way that she felt, but of course she was always denying the core flowing elements of the deeper, more raw elements of her feeling state. So as soon as we moved into bringing that sound into what you've already referred to as me helping people to find their note, but our note sits in our heart, not in our head. So
Right.
she was actually able to really feel how this sound would open up the natural impulse that she had, which was always to love, but
Wow.
also to sound as though she was loving rather than to sound as though she was a victim. We knew that she was victimized, but she never considered herself to be a victim. And so we moved through the corridor of that prison to do with victimization and healed each aspect of it.
Oh. And I wanted to ask you a little bit about that process. Um, what I observed about her is that she had a really unique way to be completely transparent. And you helped her to find that transparency with herself and also to find that transparency and connection with others. And she could speak to someone after her work with you so honestly, and so clearly. And her whole voice, as you call it, the voice of change, she began to embody that so clearly for all of us, whether she was speaking or not, you know. And she just had the honesty, and she could do so without hurting anyone's feelings. How can this book teach us more ways to improve our interpersonal communication with other people so that we can be ourselves and be that voice of change? You know, but so many of us also may be, you know, a little bit protective of the world's feelings and our loved ones' feelings. And you helped her with that so clearly.
Well, it's very sweet of you to say. I mean, I believe fundamentally that I merely identified what was a very natural quality within Diana that was immensely intrinsic, this quality of transparency.
Yes.
And I just identified it because it was never considered to be an agency of import with the establishment. I changed that belief within her by saying, no, this is your greatest virtue. Because inherently within that transparency was gentleness. Within that transparency was delicacy, that she was more interested in somebody else's state than in her own state in that moment of conversation. And so she would seek that out and speak with people in a very grounded, ordinary way, you know, rather than assuming the overly decorous nature of the role, which is caught by the way we define the ego, wishing to fulfill the role. She did the opposite. So she, you know, I said, well, you know, you're already looking amazing because of what you're wearing, you know, because you have great taste. And she was immensely well advised by stylists. So I said, you already look extraordinarily beautiful. So let's see that as being the form. Now let's work on the form becomes informal. And so she was actually able to do that. So sometimes she would send up royal occasions that she would walk along looking extraordinary with a tiara and all of those jewels. And then as she walked by, she'd just go like that, you know, which you never see any other member, female member of the royal family doing. You know, it's sort of like that rather camp gesture that we may see drag queens use. And she would kick her leg up like that, you know. It would just be a tiny gesture of, let's not get too serious about this.
Mm-hmm.
So what goes with that delicacy is this immense fun, playfulness, and a wicked sense of humor. I mean, I say wicked meaning metaphorically speaking, not crude and evil. I don't mean that. I mean just a wonderfully witty sense of humor where she was always seeking out the absurd that would allow us to laugh, or whomever she was with, to rebalance the situation when anybody was feeling anxious or nervous about meeting someone of a seemingly lofty status. Because, you know, what I've discovered over the years working with the famous is that they don't feel famous unless that's something they're contriving through their ego. It's we who think they're famous. And so we bolster ourselves because we're going to meet a really famous person. And obviously they're anointed with some level of responsibility. So they have a very broad and extended energy field. But if we can make those people feel, no, this is a human being standing here. And she had this ability of looking at people, as I said when we first met, and her eyes were just extraordinary. You felt completely held, completely loved, completely seen, but totally honored. There's a very august politician who's still alive, a senior statesman whom I met. And he said to me, when Diana looked at some of the potentates in the world, the prime ministers, the presidents, she melted grown men's bones. So he would obviously, because they knew that she and he had this deferential connection. He was a very famous man in the world. The Obamas of the world, or whomever it happened to be, or the prime ministers, the Tony Blairs, they would queue up to meet Diana to state occasion, and he would introduce them, and they would be like quivering boys in her presence. So she had this ability to be able to seek truth in all people, a radar of pronounced proportion, an intuition that would just see if you were false or true. And if the person was false, she would just very, very gently and very graciously ease her way away from them. And if they were true, then she would tell a lot of jokes. So it's interesting, isn't it? Because the conversation of celebrity is so rich today, particularly in the US. And what I found is that the extraordinariness is the thought form creation from the collective in relation to the gifted one, because obviously they're there because they're gifted on some level. What I refer to as being anointed. I feel that their souls have a certain role to play within the wheel of destiny. So there they are as a cipher by which something else can be read. But actually they themselves are immensely ordinary.
Mm. Can we talk about self-love in relation to this book? What I'm observing so far in my reading is that it is a very powerful guide to journeying into self-love. One of the most powerful guides to self-love in a book that I've yet to explore. So what was your process to self-love like, your personal process as an author and speaker and channel, and with all the work that you do? What was your personal process of self-love during your work with her and during the writing of this book?
Well, I suppose on a simple level, the transactional process that I've been through myself through life has often been to do with the fact that I've always felt immensely loving. I've always felt myself to be a child of the world, a creature of love. And what's been interesting is that when I emit myself into the world, I often meet something other than love. So this is why I feel I was given the role to help Diana, because of being an empath. And so I understood her pain. I sort of wrap that up in relation to, I remember sharing this with her and she wept, that I feel that I've spent most of my life wandering around the world looking into people's eyes for love, and I hadn't found it. In the majority. Obviously, I'd found it in the minority. So I'm nudging our conversation towards the fact that I believe that I've experienced a tremendous amount of unloving. And rather than becoming blameworthy or accusative, rather than hating and being bitter, which I'm sure, as we all do, there have been moments when I've reacted against unloving by swearing and saying, oh, I've got to, doing something. But then when I've actually allowed myself to move away from the human reaction into the soulful response, I've dropped inside and seen the opportunity as being a moment to dig really deep to find the love of the divine within me that I could then offer the other, whether they were able to receive it or no. I do not see this as sentimental. Sometimes there's tough love and sometimes there's tender love. But if our impetus, the origin of our concern, the origin of what we wish to communicate arises from love, we dispatch it with grace, but it can be very firm.
I call that fiery grace. There's
fiery grace.
Vulnerable, gentle, soft, compassionate grace that Diana always represented, whether she was feeling whole or not in your journey with her. But oh my goodness, throughout her journey, she became this fiery grace that was just so respected and incredible.
Yeah. And she could use that. I saw her use that fiery grace in response to the beings that served her and the beings also at the same time that often didn't serve her, as we're seeing currently with Harry and Meghan. And the beings that I'm referring to are the beings who work for the tabloid press. Because I can remember leaving events with her, I mean private events rather than public events, state events, um, where we'd had lunch somewhere and we would leave the restaurant and her car would be waiting alongside 50 paparazzi. And she would automatically, do this because it wasn't an officially arranged press call, which she would also give. And they would swear. I mean, they would use really abusive language to get a reaction. And because of her sensitivity, that level of energy, because we know there is the word, but there's also the energy that goes with the word that would penetrate her. And so, sometimes she would literally drop into my arms weeping, and then we would build her up again and say, okay, well, we need to put this whole thing into proportion. And one of the ways that we're doing it, of course, as you and I know, is through energy boundaries. And so one of the first things I said was, as an empath, as you move forward as the queen of everybody's heart, you need to have energy boundaries. And at the moment, you don't have any energy boundaries. So what can those energy boundaries be? And all of this information is in the book.
Right.
And I'm sure for anybody reading, they're not unfamiliar precepts, the energy boundaries, but they're hopefully very practical about how we can still continue giving, continue loving, but at the same time, I suppose the easiest word is protect ourselves from the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune.
Mm-hmm.
In writing this book, I know that I have already disturbed a membrane in the collective which doesn't want this book to emerge.
Absolutely.
And I've already received death threats.
Oh my. Yeah, I was curious about that. How you.
And I'm sure when it becomes very public, there will be some very crude press. I'm ready for that. I've already heard from a leading journalist who said to an associate of mine, there is no way that Stewart Pearce ever had a relationship with Diana Spencer, with Princess Diana, with Diana, Princess of Wales, because he wasn't around at that time. And there was this harping criticism about the fact that I was simply lying.
Wow.
So I'm prepared for this. I have my energy boundaries alerted. And of course, there are very significant people in my life who I revere as powerful energy healers. You are one of them, whom I know that they are there for me to call on if I need to re-proportion my own energies so that my field stays intact and expanded rather than suddenly contracting and moving me into whatever state.
I really identify with that. And I feel that a lot of us can. And what could be helpful to explore within that is our value systems.
Mm.
Within ourselves. I don't mean to what replacing our value externally. You really helped Diana to go deeply into her internal value systems. And I noticed that she used a lot of powerful ACIM processes. One of the prayers that she used was, it just really touched my heart. I'm a huge ACIM fan. How did your work help her in finding these internal value systems?
So she was certainly very aware of A Course in Miracles.
Yes.
She just hadn't read it. And I said, I think we need to read it. So let's read it together, which we did. But at the same time, for me, although I lean into ACIM or some of the other, excuse me, some of the other principal zones that are significant to me, what's apparent for me is that so much of my life from an emotional point of view earlier on was in chaos. And so the first thing I realized was that I needed to find a way of ordering the chaos. And a way of ordering it was to be much more conscious about the implicit, intrinsic values that I had, and that weren't necessarily part of the world. So I find myself today speaking more and more and more about the fact that we're defining a new hierarchy of values, because the hierarchy that we were brought up with is palpably no longer working in the way that it did once for our forebears.
And she represented that as a
And she,
voice of change for that. And you discuss this in the book about the power of transcendence.
yeah.
And I loved that. So what do you feel that Diana taught us about the power of transcendence in relation to these former stuffy patriarchal roles and where we're going now?
Well, firstly, through the transparency of this is what it is, this is what they're doing. So now we can see it. Let's do something else. You know, it's that ancient alchemical law, isn't it? That if we can identify an energy by naming it, because words anchor states, then we have power over it,
Mhm.
rather than it just being an amorphous form that is hitting us left, right, and center, and we don't know how to identify it or indeed acknowledge or honor it. So this is the first thing that we did. And once it was defined, I guess I have a level of consciousness which has been honed over the years of being able to define the complex in really simple ways, mostly because as a child, the complex was scary to me. And so I found a way of being able to burrow into the core of it, where people often didn't want to go, to discover the rawness in the middle of it, and to realize that actually it was just very elaborate. It was an elaborate smokescreen, and right at the very core of it was a hidden truth. So I would go to the value. And one of the most important things was that I could help Diana with the acknowledgement of her role was to change people's lives, and therefore to move into a space of transcendence, so that the ugly could be transcendent into beauty, that the guilt could be transcended into innocence, that the anger or hatred could be transcended into love. So we were very conscious about this. Now, there were several milestones that she experienced during those last 2 years, and one of them was Mother Teresa. And the first time Diana went to meet Mother Teresa in Calcutta, Mother Teresa had been taken to Italy because she was unwell. I think she needed some form of surgical operation, so she was taken to Rome for this. And so the sisters within the hospice took Diana in and treated her to a very, very special gift of grace. They took her into the chapel and asked her to sit, and they sang to her. And I believe that they sang the Lord's Prayer, but they also sang Ave Maria and another level of Sanctus. And whatever they sang, I write about it in the book, she felt the Holy Spirit come into her.
Okay, babe.
And in that moment, she recognized the power of the gift of what she was being given and was irrevertibly changed. So her vibration became gifted by divine unction. And that changed her completely. There were a number of milestones that I engaged in the book, you know, sort of pinnacle points of stories that she told me. There was another one where she was just with friends visiting Paris, I don't know, clothes shopping or something. And they'd done the clothes shopping, they'd had lunch, and they were in the car going back to the airport to fly back to the United Kingdom. And one of her friends was a devout Roman Catholic and wanted to stop to go into, because there was a famous church in the outskirts of Paris or something. So they stopped. And Diana and the other friend sat in the car while the other friend went in to pray, but was gone for a very long time. And Diana was getting slightly concerned with, well, we've got a private jet to get her, or maybe it was a commercial jet to get to. And so went into the church. Well, you can imagine Diana walking into a church on the outskirts of Paris, completely unannounced. All of the women in the church just descended on her, saying, "You are like, you are," this was all in broken French, obviously. "You are like Santa Maria. You are our Holy Mother. You are our Mary." And they all wanted to kiss her feet. Now, that was a profoundly touching experience. So I guess what I'm saying is, whatever the story was, that when she met that level of raw joy or raw pain, she would just hold the person. Sometimes the person she was holding could not speak English, and she would transmit from her heart this extraordinary healing power of grace. And then they would just simply look into one another's eyes, knowing that something immense had been shared in the humanity of two people recognizing the essence of what the situation was really all about. And thereby pain was automatically transcended.
Yes, that's so tremendously powerful. Most of the time in our worlds, in the United States and in the UK, that is that level of connection, whether you're royal or not, simply is pushed away.
Yeah.
And I find that she did not put on that hat. She didn't wear that hat of superiority, anywhere and with anyone. And that's just so powerful. It's incredible. So can we talk about, I know the book discusses a lot about the vocal processes that she used to find her voice. What's that like? What was that like working with her with the vocal processes?
Oh, I mean, just immense fun, immense fun. It was playful, playful, playful. But also it had its own moments of seriousness, where something remarkable was discovered. We were just really beginning, because actually it was only for those 18 months, 2 years. We were just really beginning, and there was a lot to work on, as you can see from the patina of what I'm describing. There was a tremendous amount to work on, particularly from the inner landscape. But what was reassuring for her and also for me was that during that time of shift, moving away from the royal family, the annulment of the marriage being broadcast, and then the shift in her status, that she was no longer the Princess of Wales, she was Diana, the Princess of Wales. So the HRH was taken from her. Her Royal Highness was taken away. That automatically she received opportunities to talk, to give speeches. You okay?
Yeah, it's Sunday, so we have a little one that'll occasionally interrupt.
And because she was given so many opportunities to make speeches, she had an opportunity to execute what we were working on. And so what I believe that she required was much more weight, much more, that the energy of her voice became much more part of her body, that the breath was much stronger. So she sounded less ill at ease or nervous. And as a result of that, she was able to really affect the change that was needed in those moments, because most of her speeches were in charitable institutions.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that I was trying to really assist her with, so that she could feel completely authentic in her voice, was the use of the rhythm of the sentence, because often in reading the sentence or in speaking the sentence, she would use a comma as a full stop.
Mm.
So the voice would go da 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 da, which is a very common sound today. But what happens when the person drops, it's called a falling inflection, is they immediately disconnect whatever's being said from the listener. And so what I had her do was to simply feel again the flow of whatever she was saying. So it wasn't da 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 da. It became da 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 da. And you get to a period point or a full stop. Now that automatically opens up an energy which allows people to listen in much more intently, because the rhythm is not being broken up.
What does that do energetically in our flow of connection to not just others, but to ourselves?
What it does is it makes us more real. What it does is it makes us more relaxed. What it does, it makes us feel more quintessential. What it does is to show us, because we can see the palpable effect that is on the face or the body of the people sitting in front of us, that they automatically engage. It's part of what I refer to as being the magnetic voice.
Mm.
It entrains the listener. Do you see? It's actually what great performers do, that they draw 2,500 people or whatever into the palm of their hands purely by using their breath. So everybody, the audience, begins to breathe with the speaker rather than holding the breath, because the speaker is not using their breath well. And of course, that's right at the very core of the Holy Communion of our relationships. You know, the mother and child, when she is breathing in a certain rhythm, the child breathes with her and the child is soothed. Or in lovemaking, you know, in the passion of two lovers making love, though in the height of lovemaking, we breathe the same breath. And then when we move away, we move back into our own rhythm. So I introduced this. This is a way of literally of seducing your audience into listening to you.
Mm.
And that she loved doing because she saw the immediate response and she saw that it was dynamic and interesting and real and loving. And as we were saying earlier, you know, for somebody who was so rich in love, the one thing that she simply wanted was to see a response, a resonance of love on the outside of her, which increased her love.
And do you feel that she did?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Because there was always the opposite.
Right.
You see the aggressive repudiation, and all that does is to contract us, as we know. But the opposite literally expands us.
Mm.
And so we worked on these qualities of force to expand her field. And the more she expanded her field, consciously allowing her energy field, because she could feel her field around her, you know, her etheric sheath, expanding, 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 but still staying completely protected, which is why her radiation became bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. At the core of it was pure love.
Absolutely. And you mentioned in the book that Diana had a unique heart path, you know, being the queen of people's hearts, and she never really viewed herself being, you know, the queen of England, but the queen of people's hearts. So in that unique heart path, how can this book help us become closer to our own unique heart path?
Well, there's a mission statement which is opened by the book, because the book is just the beginning of the project. It's one of a number of books, I believe, that I will write around the same substance to do with Diana. But actually, what Diana wanted me to do, we talked about it way back then, was to create the Diana Heart Path. And this will be a series of workshops or seminars around the world where principally ladies can come, women can come and experience a unique communion where we meet together in kindred spirit land.
Mm.
And then two, that we identify what the oppression is within us individually, within us collectively, and find ways of being able to move the oppression into freedom. Number three, that we honor the call of the voice of change, noticing that we're living a shifting point, a wave of energy, which is requiring us to become essentially more whom we are rather than what the world wishes us to be. And that's just the beginning. Then it opens up the Diana Heart Club, which will be a special club for anybody who wishes to be part of, to engage in certain extraordinary activities around the world, which won't just be promulgated by me. There will be, you know, you, Pamela, coming in and teaching a certain whatever you want to teach that is in adherence with the Diana Heart Path, which is effectively, let's open our hearts and love.
And thus continuing her unique heart path and ours.
Absolutely.
I'm so excited to be a part of that.
I mean, I can't wait. I can't wait. I can't wait. I want there to be, for example, a goal to work towards, which will be the first Diana Hart Conference. And that will be an annual event in London and in New York. So people can fly in from all over the world to be part of the conference where unique women and presumably some men who have their hearts open and are really in alignment with the expansion or the promulgation of the divine feminine can speak about what their own unique craft is, what their own unique skills are that will inform us to become even more open, even more expanded, even more truthful, and thereby we heal the world.
Let's talk about that state of the world and where we are when you look at the third dimensional collective right now. You know, here in the United States, our president is in the process of being impeached, and in this harsh world of President Trump's impeachment and Brexit and, you know, potential war, what contribution can Diana's life provide to us as a collective in our current state?
Well, the simplest answer is everything, because it's the opposite of what we see on the world stage in the gross form of an old establishment, a patriarchy that denies change and holds on to its strictures in the grim moment of its dying, and is crude and untrue and unloving to those people that it most affects. And that's just the beginning. Of course, then we get into all the varying interactions of what that's really all about. You know, that the level of division that is brought about through white nationalism,
Yes.
rather than what we're attempting to be, which is that no divisions can exist in the temple of oneness, because we're all inclusively involved. So I feel that there's the old paradigm, but there's also the path, the heart path.
Mm-hmm.
And it's what some very remarkable people are doing around the world. And I would suggest the majority are women, because I feel that the next chapter of history will be written by the women and the girls. So I'm thinking of Marianne Williamson and what she's doing. I'm thinking of Jacinta Ardern, the Prime Minister of New Zealand. I'm thinking of Greta Thunberg, who is the age of 16, is leading climate change effectively.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, she's alongside many other extraordinary people. And so many of the women that are stepping forward, particularly in some of the nation states of Europe, who are being appointed as prime minister or president, these remarkable women. So the revolution that is taking place is absolutely remarkable to bring about a parity, to bring about a balance. So the historic significance of what I've written suggests that from a collective point of view, from a collective consciousness point of view, Diana was one of the elements that began the revolution, that began the shift of consciousness, not her individually, but the energies that moved through her, and particularly through the element of her dying, when a force of Shakti was released in the world that in modern civilization had hitherto not been experienced. We've experienced similar events. We know that something huge happened on 9/11.
Mm-hmm.
We know that something huge happened when Dr. Martin Luther King was shot. We know that something huge happened when JFK, that altered the current of world history. And when Bobby Kennedy was assassinated, when Malcolm X was assassinated.
Mm-hmm.
Diana's passing was the same, but something untold happened, where her dying affected over 5.9 billion people, meaning that on the day of her funeral, that's how many people were recorded of tuning into the televisual broadcast of her funeral. 5.9 billion people, which then was about 3/4 of the population of the planet.
Yeah.
So I explain in the book what that force was. What is Shakti? When is it released? What is it? What effect does it have on us? Where does it come from? And what is its intended purpose?
We all felt it in that moment. I remember stopping what I was doing, and the first thing I said was, "What?" I felt internally attacked. It was a very strange feeling. Like it felt as if a beautiful, graceful deer had just bled out in front of me. I mean, this is the Native American in me speaking. That's how deeply it affected me, and I felt to just and I knew very little of Diana, and still feel that in comparison to you, know very little of Diana, and apparently the world stands to know a lot more.
Well, there are some very remarkable books written, that are chronicles of her times. One of them is by Tina Brown, which is a really excellent book that is a sort of diary, as it were, or chronicle of her life and the significant events, so you can begin to understand from the outside point of view. With great respect to Tina, who is a very extraordinary doyen of the advertising industry, of the media world, and is held in high regard in the way that Anna Wintour is held in high regard, who is now, I don't know, the CEO of Condé Nast. I mean, she runs Vogue, as we know. But what's interesting is that these people, these two blessed women, that they also hold within them a disregard for some of the subtleties that we're expressing. And therefore, they're not able to enter into the soul of what was taking place and disregard the empathic as being disgraceful or disreputable or frankly stupid.
Mhm.
And so this is why I had to write this book. Now, there was another thing that you came to my consciousness when you were speaking, which was a little bit more important. It's interesting, when we speak about this energy, it comes in
Yes.
really strongly, the
What
negative that
innocence?
wants to
It's that
destroy.
feeling of us relating to the power of the innocence and the tragedy that was felt when that innocence is so boldly taken, and what that means
Yeah,
in our
yeah,
connection to our personal power,
yeah.
without having our innocence ever being taken. Like it still couldn't take that divine feminine grace because of the atrocity of this loss.
It's interesting, isn't it? You know, there's a psychic phenomenon in the intelligence of our planetary lives. That force is really interesting because it's very dark.
Yes.
We know that it can actually affect the lives of millions of people. This candle was blown out on August the 31st, 1997, in the Pont de Almar tunnel, which means the Bridge of Souls. And there's a whole journey in the book, I won't go into it now, but of why there, why there, why there, why there. Now, we know that she was killed. But what's interesting, just as JFK was assassinated, or Bobby Kennedy was assassinated, or Martin, et cetera, what's interesting is that the force that perpetrates the action is always, it seems, unaware of what's going to happen within the human spirit, within the human soul. And as we see with Diana, the wave of consciousness that was emitted was absolutely gargantuan. And everybody came together. That somehow the force of darkness is not aware of that collectivization that can be activated from an inspirational point of view, even though it arises out of desperation. That I find fascinating.
Me too.
And it's because it's epic, isn't it?
It is.
And we're seeing, I feel, a staggered or slow burn emission of that darkness through the higher regimes, through of the central powering organisms on our planet. But what we're also seeing is this wave of energy that is coming, that is bringing about monumental change because it's the breath and the voice of the feminine. Whether it's hashtag Me Too, the emergence of these extraordinary female politicians around the world, the fact that I'm working with a woman at the moment who's an economist, and she's probably going to be voted into becoming the first female president of the World Economic Forum, which has always been staunchly patriarchal. And she's cool. She's one of us. We talk spirit talk.
Nice.
So this is happening at the same time. And I believe that, you know, going back to the core of the question that you were asking about, how can this book or how can other books like it help? I believe that what they're doing is that they're inspiring people into the alternatives that exist. That the Diana Heart Path will allow people to see that the heart has an energy field 5,000 times greater than the human brain, and will always, once it's used or dispensed with passion, with compassion, with love, with delicacy, with gentleness, and with grace, it will always ring true. It will always see through the situation. You know, it's sort of, for me, it's very much balanced with one of the greatest points of obscurity created by the patriarchy was this thing of blind faith. that because they were in positions of power, we had to give faith to them. And then we begin to realize, wait a minute, I gave all of my faith to this priest, but now I discover that he was buggering the boys. And so I feel that what we're doing is we're recalibrating the essence of faith in our lives, and we're turning it into visionary faith.
Mm-hmm.
So in other words, what I feel we're doing is as we move through the veil of shadows, we see the light beyond. And that's something that I feel that Diana and a number of other personalities, but because we're talking about her, gave us, that they gave us the possibility of seeing the light beyond. That if she was able to transcend through the heavy pressures that she was working through, surely there is hope for every woman who is living in a marriage of oppression, that she can also lift herself into transcendence if she has the right degree of help, the right degree of courage, that she has courage, and that she has the information that will bring her to that point of liberation if she's willing to go there. I feel that that's what Diana showed us.
And she spoke, her voice was ring, and she probably at times felt courage and at times very much so did not. And what a powerful, powerful legacy she leaves to her children and to the world in finding and honoring the power of her voice. So it feels that she really understood that the world can't repress her and the world isn't the cause of anything that she could fear. And that she saw that she had she had chosen to exercise her freedom of choice of consciousness, and that she projected from her own grand design of power.
Yeah, I mean, looking at the early part of her life, one of the philosophies that I'd introduced her as a spiritual being having a human experience was that everything that we see here is merely a canvas for our consciousness. It's not happening to us, it's responding to us.
Mm-hmm.
And if it's darkness, we need to take full responsibility for it. So we identify, well, where does the darkness come from within me that has created this? And so I suppose speculatively, we can talk about karma, or we can talk about what we've actually transgressed in this life, and what it's offering us is this moment of atonement. And that the next stage is purely and simply to see, okay, well, if this is disgrace, what's the opposite? Well, it's grace. Well, let's start behaving gracefully. And what's extraordinary, I've discovered, is that suddenly the years and years and years and years and years and years of interminable disgrace suddenly evaporates. Mm-hmm. Because the energy is it's the core of alchemy. So this is what I introduced to her, which was something that I'd been taught, 10 years prior to meeting her. And I was just beginning to emerge in my own world, because I was developing in the beginning of the 90s. I'd been through the finalization of a very challenging relationship where my partner tried to kill me. Mm. And so when I moved into sanctuary, away from that turmoil, it took me about 7 years, maybe 6 years, to heal what was happening within my field, which brought, of course, the teachers. Was when the student is ready, the masters come. So I was hearing about this information, this leading edge information. And then people of might would appear for me to dispatch as I was beginning to embody the information. So it wasn't just an idea, it was an experience. And so along came a Petri dish of extraordinary proportion called Diana, Princess of Wales, where I was able to say, okay, let's firstly detach. I know you're upset, but let's detach, feel stillness, and observe. And we're going to breathe deeply, and I'm going to chant the Om. Om. And she would automatically calm down. Okay, now let's look at it with fresh eyes. And 9 times out of 10, after releasing the reaction, she was there. She was there with the essence of the truth. So, to bring it all into a synthesized arena, I feel that what we're doing, and this touches into what you were sharing at the beginning about the fact that we're going through these very remarkable times where we're moving through unnavigable waters where we haven't been before. And when we go through this, this is called Renaissance. We can't refer to it as that because we're living it. But in 300 years' time, they'll be looking back and saying, wow, look at the Renaissance that they lived through. But what we're doing is that we're really beginning to see in the swiftly currents of change, where's my life buoy? Or what can I hold on to? And so we go to the divine precepts. And this is what has happened, I believe, in all the successive civilizations that have occurred on our planet, because we know that nothing is stultified, everything is constantly moving, constantly changing, constantly growing. So there is a rise and a fall. Our civilization is falling. And so we need to determine, well, what are the precepts? And I feel that that's what the hierarchy of values are. It just so happened that here was a walking receptacle who had experienced untold challenge, where her soul had shrunk as a result of the fear and the bulimia and the 3 suicide attempts. All of it is in the book, and needed to transcend because she was glorious and just didn't recognize how glorious she was.
And
So I was able to fan the flames of glory.
yes.
And I wasn't the only person. She had a number of people around her. I mean, one of my dearest friends is the astrologer that helped Diana, who has written the preface of the book and
Yes.
done a beautiful job. This is Debbie Franks, and who is immensely wise and insightful, and she doesn't suddenly become a scientist in the astrological arena. What she does is to take the science of astrology and grounds it, so it makes it palpably truthful and real. She's affected my life hugely.
Mm. What I will remember more than anything is that she laughed, and she laughed a lot. She unabashedly expressed joy, and the mind that is awakening so powerfully in this way can laugh at itself, and it can do it often, and it laughs not as a defense mechanism, but as a beautiful echo of honoring all the healing of the old patterns that show up in karma. Not to reinstate it or to relive it, but to simply give it honor. And I will remember her well. And I can't wait to complete my reading of your book. I'm only halfway through, embarrassingly enough. But I stop when I'm reading, and I stop often. And it's so inexplicably powerful. And it's in this patterning of awakening our DNA to the essence of love and to the essence of finding our own voice of change. For me, it's compassion and connection. So I strongly identify with the work that you're doing to allow the world to hear Diana's voice and to, better yet, find their own. So what she's saying to me now as I channel her is to remember well that we are creating our tomorrows right now, and that what we are experiencing will never come to us from outside of ourselves, but always from the voice of love within. And I'm just, it's such an honor to be able to talk about this with you today. For those of you just joining, we have the lovely author of Diana, The Voice of Change. This is Stewart Pearce. You can find, I believe we can pre-order it on Amazon Prime right now. That's where
You can acquire it. You can actually acquire it. Oh, on Amazon Prime. Oh, really? I mean, what I will do is I'll send you the short link, which is very simply http :/ my book /Diana, and then you're there. And so you can acquire the book. It's just that you're acquiring it through the English distribution center for Amazon. And therefore, I mean, a lot of my US clients have already bought it and their books are on the way. But the most easy thing, of course, is the Kindle. And over the next 2 weeks, I will record the audio.
Wonderful. I'm waiting on that. We love your beautiful voice, and we can't wait to have it. I was in my kitchen today, like commanding my Google to play your audiobook, and she's like, I can't do that yet.
Oh, you did?
Yes, yes.
Oh, I love it. I love it. I love it. I was hoping that I would do it last week, but when I was in Egypt in December, I contracted very, very bad flu, and it affected my voice. So I lost my voice for the first time in 45 years or so.
Oh.
And it's taken a long time to recover it. I was a creaking croak for a long time. And you can still hear there's a tickle, which makes me cough.
Yeah.
But I'm doing something about that. I'm having wonderful acupuncture. So I was waiting for my voice to come back so that I could record effortlessly this beautiful book. I wrote it to speak it, actually. I wrote it within the rhythm of what it is to speak, because I'm still learning what it is to be a writer.
I can't wait
But,
to hear it on audiobooks, quite
oh,
frankly.
bless you, bless you.
The
And then people can listen to it in the car.
Yeah, we Americans love that. We love accents, particularly from the UK and from Ireland, and we just kind of get into that rhythm and flow, and it really benefits us. So I can't wait to get the audiobook as well. And of course, my hardback is on the way. So exciting. I loved it, and I can't wait to finish it. I would just stop because it's so powerful. So there are times, yes, Diana, the voice of change.
Because
That's
we
what.
haven't talked about this.
Uh-huh. Yes, it's
Because
incredible.
a lot of people look at it and say, oh my God, I believe this is Diana now,
Mm-hmm. I believe so.
rather than then.
That's how I see her as well when she comes to me. And of course, you know, I've been waiting on her word to channel her, you know, as a channel here on this planet. And I told her I wouldn't do it unless Stewart Pearce facilitated it. So, way to put you on the spot, right?
It's please go ahead, go ahead, go ahead, because it's extraordinary. I get emails. I get 100 emails a day from people all over the world saying Diana's speaking to me,
Mm-hmm.
and they're mostly ladies.
Mm-hmm. I believe she speaks to many of us. It doesn't just stop here with you or with I as channels. So
She's speaking to all of us.
brilliant. So very exciting.
Bless you. Thank you so much
Thank you.
for
Thank you.
this opportunity to
Talk a
share.
little bit about what's next. So you said that you might be doing a series of books about.
Well, let's see what happens with this. But yes, I mean, this is just the beginning. The most important thing is, and I'd love everybody, including yourself, to go to www.dianathevoiceofchange.com. And it's just a site, we opened it just yesterday. There's a little bit more work to be done on it, but it's looking very beautiful. And there are the offerings of the Diana Heart Path and the Diana Heart Club. Because in the Diana Heart Club, there are two streams. There's the Sapphire membership, the Sapphire Miracle membership, and the Pearl Miracle membership. So they're equitably positioned from a financial point of view. In buying into the club, there are a number of free things that will be offered. For example, there will be jewelry that I'm having made for each member. So the sapphire will be a beautiful sapphire to be worn on the heart, surrounded in pearls, which was Diana's favorite stone, as were pearls. And the pearl membership is a beautiful drop pearl. And then there will be, discounted access to online courses, a monthly broadcast that I will provide, the Diana Hart Conference, and a number of extraordinary activities.
Oh, the Diana Hart Conference. That's exciting.
Oh yeah, a conference in London. It will be a 2-day conference in London and in New York, where we can all meet, genuinely meet. So it will be a wonderful social occasion with a number of activities involved. And of course, in addition to all of that, there will be remarkable speakers who are all leading edge speakers, providing a unique integrity and facilitation in the process of what our world is all about as it goes through this radical change.
Wonderful.
Um, it feels so beautiful. I love it.
Me too. So excited and honored to be a part of it and to be supporting you throughout it. So
Thank you.
thank you for being here with me.
And just one last thing I would love to ask is that when anybody goes to, and I will send you the short link to Amazon, when anybody acquires a Kindle or indeed the softback, and you've read it, I would love everybody to go onto Amazon and write a comment, please, because what it will do is to increase the algorithms attached to the production of the book, which means that even more people will get to read the book, even more people will receive the soul of Diana in essence.
Absolutely. Ah, brilliant. Okay, YouTube, I'm going to stop our podcast now.
Thank you so
Have a
much.
lovely Stewart Pearce at dianathevoiceofchange.com. and you can get the book there, and you will love it absolutely as much as I do. But I will tell you, when I read it, I just have to stop sometimes and go, oh my gosh, the power of that. I can't move forward again. I just have to sit with this a moment. This is just how I read books, you know. And then she'll say, well, you must come back and read a little bit more to understand what you're getting. So if you go into that, just understand that the power of this book is just so palpably felt in your minds and bodies and hearts. So if you're going to transmit it, take your time with it. It's incredible reading, and I'm so excited about having it.
Most of the people who have spoken to me thus far said, I've read your book. I read it in one take. And they didn't go to sleep. They just
Not me.
and I said, what can you remember? And that's when they start to be a little bit meager about their memory. And I said, okay, well, you've done the reading. Now go back and read it again.
Now do the feeling.
Do the thing. Exactly. You've done the thing. Because I feel that the mind is greedy for more information about Diana. So it's seeking out in a greedy way. And of course, there's a lot of information that one will find, but it's, you know, if you deal with it like that, it's very superficial. So I'm glad you're taking your time. I have to go to a meeting, so I must rush off.
Absolutely.
Much love.
All right. Thank you so much. Much love.
Take
Bye-bye.
care. Thank you. Thank you from my heart.
Thank you. Have a great week.
And lots of love to everybody who's watching.
Yes. Thank you, everyone who's watching. We'll see you soon.